Welcome to A Deeper Look with me, Karen Morgan, Egberto Willies, and Joel Segal. We have three special guests today, but I'm going to let Joel introduce them to you a little bit later. But for now, I just want to welcome you and give you a little overview of what we're talking about today. It's 5 minutes to midnight, and the Trump administration is desperately trying to convince the American people that the coronavirus is going to disappear, the economy will magically restore itself, and Blacks have never had it better. The biggest problem for this administration's narrative is many people see a vote for Trump as an endorsement for a future race war and the acceptance of a world where COVID-19 becomes this generation's endless plague. So what do you guys think?
I am personally, first of all, everything that you just said there is absolutely true. The good thing about it is I think, I have faith. Some people tell me I may be naive. I've been in this country for a very long time. I have faith in the American people. And I think they've seen the results. And when I say the American people, I'm talking about all Americans altogether. You see, generally when some people say American people, we know what they really mean. I'm saying
Right.
the totality of all Americans are going to vote this guy out of office, and they're not going to do it on the margins. We're going to see a hell of a coalition that's going to do it. So it's 5 minutes till midnight, Karen, and you're absolutely right.
I hope you're absolutely right. I really need to see him leave by a huge margin. I do not want it to go into the Supreme Court. That is showing that they will hand him the election given the thinnest of margin. All they need is an invitation, and they're going to try to give this thing to Trump. We need to stop them from getting that invitation. They cannot be allowed to participate. Go down, put on your black robes, and go somewhere and sit down. Joel, will you introduce our guest for us?
Yeah, Karen, I want to thank you so much. Great to be with you and my brother, Egberto Willies. We have a really, as Ed Sullivan would say, a really big show tonight. We've got
really, really big.
Yeah, we do. We have Dr. Walter Tsou, the former president of the American Public Health Association, former health commissioner of the city of Philadelphia. He's a national expert on single-payer healthcare and public health infectious diseases. Welcome, Dr. Tsou, to A Deeper Look. We have Dr. Robert Fritrakis, American lawyer, political author, political candidate, professor of political science and the social and behavioral sciences, the department at Columbia State Community College. He is the editor of the Columbia Free Press since 1993 and wrote extensively about the 2004 U.S. presidential election and related 2004 U.S. election voting controversies. And Karen, this should be close to your heart as a former senior legislative assistant to Representative Conyers. He was very, very close to John Conyers and was a senior advisor to John Conyers for years on civil rights matters, election protection. And last but not least, Undersecretary of State Robert Wilson from North Carolina. He served under 3 administrations, 3 secretaries of states. He's what I call a progressive within the Democratic Party who makes very, very good trouble. And the best thing about him is he refuses to clip his gray beard. And, I've affectionately called him Graybeard. Back to you, Karen.
Okay, so not quite sure who I should direct. I guess the doctor. My question, Trump has been telling us since COVID appeared that it was just going to poof, go away. But it looks like it's doing exactly the opposite, that it's headed towards a surge. So and we had a president that seems to be determined to spread it about. He keeps having these maskless rallies with people, even vulnerable people. We had a senior rally. But I mean, what can you tell us about COVID at this point? I mean, should we be bracing and getting ready for a new outbreak like the one we've never seen? Because we never went to zero. So to have an uptick means we already started at a high point and now we're going to take it higher.
Karen, thank you for asking the question. And you're totally correct. Unfortunately, we have never actually lowered our numbers. And so already are starting at a high level. And the most recent statistics suggest that we are about to hit our, well, depending on who you talk to, Fauci says that we never actually got rid of the first wave. But we're definitely looking like we're going to have a second big wave. Most states are actually hitting record numbers of COVID cases right now. And the sad part about the president is that has said long ago that he thought that the virus would mysteriously disappear. Well, he obviously knows nothing about public health because it's doing exactly the opposite. He continues to downplay the virus. And in fact, the virus is continuing to set record numbers. And I think, the American people realize increasingly, it's kind of like the person who cries wolf all the time, that if you say it's going to go away, people know that he lies all the time. And no one seriously in academia or a scientist really takes Trump seriously as far as his pronouncements, because
I
the
believe him,
statistics
Dr.
say
Seuss.
everything opposite. Yeah, Joel?
I believe him. I believe everything he says. Not good.
Okay, well, the only problem here, Joel, and I think that it's the thing that he's counting on is what he has not, the thing that he hasn't taken into consideration. People who die from COVID have a tendency to stay dead. So while he's saying, we're getting over this, we're going to move on, we're going to do whatever, Granny is still dead. And folks are unlikely to forget that.
I think
So
that
when you agree that this is a bit of a problem for him?
Yeah, that explains his poll numbers. He's way behind in the race because he has no accomplishments. The economy is in the toilet. Hundreds of thousands of deaths that he could have prevented if he hadn't have been worried about, calming the stock market and didn't want to create panic. And so he just lied, and he's lied his whole career. And people, whether you're, when you die or you're sick from COVID, that's not partisan. That's not Republican or Democrat. It's called death. And I don't think the American public are going to be that forgiving when it comes to their loved ones, dying, or they didn't, the nurse didn't have their PPE, or the person who's lost their job and has no safety net to pay for the utilities, to put food on the table for their kids, to make sure they don't have, they're evicted. Millions of people are facing eviction. And what is Donald Trump's plan? Oh, let me guess. Yo, you're on your own. Instead of win, we're in it together. It's yo, you're on your own.
Now,
Yeah.
Dr. Tsou, I have a quick question for you, however. When we take a look at, you're also an expert on Medicare for All and these aspects of healthcare. One of the things that I think is going to affect, that I think is even, death is bad. And as Karen said, when you're dead and you're not coming back. However, the big problem is with those who survive COVID, as I see it, because that seemed to be something that they're going to be living, for some people, something that they're going to be living with for quite some time, with all the problems that come along with COVID. So how, if we don't change our healthcare system to a system that is more humane, how are we going to deal with that based on these people permanently having a debilitating pre-existing condition?
Well, you're pointing out something that actually is troubling to everybody in healthcare, and that's what they call the long haulers. These are people who've been infected, they never really recovered, they're chronically fatigued, they barely have the energy to walk up the steps, they have maybe some type of continual respiratory or cardiac problems. And you're right, this virus is new enough that we really don't know how long these long haulers will be symptomatic like this, but things that we know about the virus suggests that in fact it may be a permanent disability for many of these people. And think about, we have like 8 million people who have been infected with the COVID virus. We don't know how many of them are long haulers, but we suspect a huge number who didn't quite die, but actually are chronically fatigued, and they will not be able to participate in our economy or the workforce. And our healthcare system will be constantly strained trying to pay for their medical bills for them.
I have another question for you with regard to the chronically fatigued. But I don't mean the chronically fatigued people who manage to not succumb to COVID. I mean the chronically fatigued frontliners, like the people on the front lines, the doctors, the nurses,
Exactly.
we're not taking care of you, we're not giving you the PPE you need, and you're not getting a break. It's like wave after wave after wave. I mean, how long can you guys stand there in the face of this endless wave?
Yeah, well, you're totally right. I mean, when these viruses hit the hospitals and they fill up every ICU bed and then into the ERs and overflowing into tents outside, you're talking about people who are literally living in the hospital for weeks on end. And this is like totally unacceptable. And there are not, frankly, enough nurses and doctors out there who can, have the skills and ability to take care of so many sick people for weeks on end. So it is a huge problem. It's, even worse, I believe, in many of the rural parts of our country, because they're the ones who have been following the mission or the wishes of Donald Trump. Go around without your mask, live your life as normal, don't social distance. And guess what? They got sick. And now they're really, really screwed. I mean, Idaho, Montana, South Dakota, North Dakota, these people are getting record numbers of cases, and their hospitals can't deal with it.
Walter, why, Dr. Tsou, why did Taiwan, Singapore, China, Australia have such dramatic reductions in infections and deaths compared to the United States?
Well, Taiwan actually is a very good example. They are only 100 miles off the coast of China. So, and they have 23 million people. You would think that they would be a natural for having a overwhelming epidemic in their country. But in fact, I think they've had like maybe 500 cases total, and they've had maybe a dozen deaths. I mean, it's really remarkable how well they've been able to control it. And why is that? Because back in 2003, when SARS came to Taiwan, they learned a lesson about about their respect for public health and the value of quarantining. So they aggressively tested everybody who came into their country. They would quarantine them for 14 days, and they would retest them again to make sure that they weren't infectious. And they effectively went after everybody early on to make sure that they could control that virus. And because they have a single payer system, people in their country were not afraid to come in and get tested, worrying about the cost of this care. And they also had a database, because they had a national health insurance database where they can store all the test results, all the treatment results, and they could figure out very quickly who has been tested, who hasn't been tested. And also they actually took the travel history of people in Taiwan from the immigration services, and they integrated into their national health database. So they also knew where everybody had traveled. Now, some people in America would say that's an infringement on our rights, but let me tell you right now, in my mind, I would rather know this type of information in order to control a life-threatening virus than to worry about some of these, what people might consider intrusions, because I think, it actually has paid off for Taiwan. Taiwan essentially has had no cases now that they can look at. Their economy is back to normal. People eat at restaurants, they go to sporting events, they go to concerts, and we can't even talk about that in this country.
Yeah, we're still locked in.
Yeah, I want to extend that to Bob, because you made, Dr. Fritrakis, you mentioned something that kind of touched when you talk about we are infringing on people's rights. You would rather infringe on somebody's rights. Isn't it true, though, Bob, that really a sick person that's pushing a disease is actually infringing on the rights of others?
I would say two things to that. One, being dead is a huge infringement on your right to do anything as well. The first part. And the second part is your being sick and demanding that some other people help you is an infringement upon their right. So I would submit that if you don't feel like you should wear a mask or you should social distance or whatever, okay, that's fine. Then don't. But don't go out when you get sick and ask anybody to help you because you wanted to have your rights. So have your rights in your house by yourself and ride this storm alone, and don't make other people ride it with you.
Well, I would argue that you start with the right to life. If we go back to the first liberal philosopher, Thomas Hobbes, right to life, liberty follows because you have no liberties if you're dead.
Exactly. You all the rest of it is irrelevant, So, I mean, I don't even understand this conversation. You're infringing upon my right. You have a right.
When you deal with a respiratory infectious disease, people have a right to breathe fresh air without knowing that they're going to be infected by someone else, which is one of the reasons why social distancing and mask wearing is something that is a public good. We should all be practicing these things. And that's why quarantining people who are known to be positive is, we might say that's infringing on my right, but frankly, you don't have a right to breathe on other people who are not positive and possibly spread a respiratory illness on them. So society does have a right to say, listen, for the basic function of society, you should stay home. And frankly, most people should realize that this is actually a act of patriotism, not something like an infringement on people's rights. You're helping to save your society because right now our economy is in the toilet and it's never going to come out if we keep letting this virus spread throughout restaurants and bars and stadiums.
Dr. Tsou, as an Asian Pacific American, how did it make you feel to have the President of the United States repeatedly refer to COVID-19 as the Asian flu?
Well, he called it the Kung Fu flu or the Chinese flu and
supply chain cane flu.
Yeah, it is unnecessarily derogatory and racist to make comments like this. I mean, the reason why when this virus first came out, they named it COVID-19 is they wanted to be very clear that they're not going to call it the Wuhan virus or the China virus. They wanted to make sure that people knew that this was a coronavirus that was potentially infective for anybody who comes in contact with it. And that's the way we should look at the virus, in a respectful way, and making comments like that, what could possibly be seen as anything but racist and derogatory to a whole segment of our society.
Well, it also takes they use the race element in a manner that's used all of the time to deflect, right? It's also a form of deflection. I can deflect my incompetence by actually making a big stink about race because everybody's going to jump and talk about racism. They don't see how incompetent I am with the drug. Now, Robert Wilson hasn't been into the conversation yet, and I do have an angle that I want to bring him in on there. You actually a assistant secretary of state in North Carolina. You've actually had to work with people as far as how people are going to work with the state. Do you think the state should have a right to tell people wear a mask, to tell people that in order to protect the citizenry, you who have elected me have given me directions that I should be able to do this with you?
Well, my bosses were the ones that were elected. I was the one that they decided that I would come work for them. So I was not in an elected position. However, I was fortunate enough to work under 3 different secretaries. But I would simply say to you that what a lot of people don't understand about this is nothing new. We've been here before. We went through this in 1918 with the Spanish flu. And what people don't understand about this pandemic is we've had pandemics before. We had it in 1918 with the Spanish flu. When the Spanish flu first hit, people didn't really take it seriously. And people were kind of having problems with wearing a mask back then. So they wore masks for a little while. Part of the population wore masks, and a little bit of it got better, but it never went away. And the second phase, when it came back in the second phase, it came back with a vengeance. And when it came back with a vengeance, the only way they were able to get out of that was they actually made it mandatory to wear masks, social distancing, and they had come up with some medicine that would help deal with the Spanish flu. But it was social distancing. A lot of people had to stay in their houses, and they also it was mandatory to wear masks. So we've been here before. The problem that we got now is we've gotten in a political climate now where people think that if I'm obligated to do something, then the government is telling me to do something, then I shouldn't do that. But I think when you get to a point where your ideas jeopardize my health, then I think the government should have a right to tell you, yes, it's time for you to mandate wearing a mask because it affects the health of everybody. Because you can't just move in your little corner and stay in your little corner for the rest of the duration. But again, I think we're going to have to look at this from the point of view that this is not about us individually, but this is all about us collectively. This is not about a red state, a blue state, or a purple state. This is about the United States. And we got to do this as one. And you can't just separate us. So we're going to have to come up. I agree with Biden that we're going to have to come up with a plan to deal with this. This is the only way we're going to get out of this. And we can't have 3/4 of the population buy in. Everybody's going to have to buy in.
Robert Wilson, I don't
Sir.
understand something. An act of patriotism for your country doesn't mean you're going to fight in a war. An act of patriotism means you want to save lives. We're from in North Carolina. They don't even say the word government. They say government. The government is the enemy, except when the government provides Medicare, public schools, ambulance, police, libraries, yet they're against the government telling them to wear a mask. And the question that I would ask our guests is, isn't wearing a mask an act of patriotism to your country because you're going to save people's lives, just like you're going to save people's lives in World War II, you're going to save your buddy's life in Nazi Germany? I mean, I'm at a loss.
And I would simply say to that, absolutely. Because like I said, this is not about you individually. This is about us collectively. And we are the United States of America. We're not, like I said, a red state or a blue state or a gray state. We are the United States. And you can't say, take care of something in Georgia and don't think that it's not going to affect Louisiana.
Exactly.
You can't take care of something in Tennessee and not think that it's going to affect Virginia. You're going to have to deal with this as one country, and everybody is going to have to buy in. Not 48 states and 2 states say no. It's going to have to be all 50 of us.
I guarantee you right now, if the president of the United States said we should all wear masks to stop the spread of COVID-19, Egberto would not say, well, I'm against the government and I'm not wearing my mask. Am I correct, Egberto?
So I tell you, I keep my mask with me all of the times. There you go, Dr. Tsou.
We got to get our mask groove on.
Yeah, we got to get our, hey, you know what? We have to get our mask that says a deeper look.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we did.
I would
We did.
I would also add one thing, one little piece of this. I think it's one thing we need to realize, and not just as people, but as a country. And that is that freedom is not free.
Exactly.
It must be fought for and maintained from generation to generation. And we have to do what's best for us as a country, not best for us as individuals, but what's best for us as a country. And then let's fight about whatever you want to do, as an individual. After we've done what's best for the country, and the country is back to what we call normal.
That is prescient, Robert. And there's one thing, and when Joel just talked about, in my part of town, they say government and all of that, all that kind of a way of talking, right? It's to kind of disassociate the government from we, the people, right? I think those of us that are progressives, I think it is time for us to start putting that message out there. It's not government, it's we, the people. And remember, government doesn't exist because without we, the people, and we are the government. So when you talk about bad about us, or when you disassociate yourself from us, then you're disassociating yourself from, then government is disassociating itself from the people, and that just can't stand.
Yes.
Yes, people are always talking about they love their country. If you loved your country, you would sacrifice for it, and you would distinguish between the nation, the people, and the state or administration that you don't like. And people talk about justice. How is it just to infect other people? I mean, it goes against love of country, and it goes against the basic concept of justice.
Amen to that.
Yes.
Exactly. And the only people that, there's another school that says, well, Trump and his buddies own stock in Regeneron. So, is that why they don't want us to wear a mask and a symbol and,
it's a good
breathe
point.
all in everybody's face and carry on?
Karen, I got to correct you. I'm sorry. He has stock in Ajax and Clorox. I want to be academically honest. I consider myself to be an academic, but now I tried the Clorox because I thought I had COVID-19, and I burned my throat. Now the other thing is, I had a black light from the 6th grade. I used to have these like hippie posters, black light psychedelic posters about the Vietnam War. He said that ultraviolet rays, could get rid of it. So I did stick it down my throat. I choked a little bit. And what's amazing, neither of them worked. And Dr. Tsou, since you are a preeminent, public health specialist, why didn't the Ajax? I'm so angry about this. I spent $6. Why did Ajax and Clorox and not solve my COVID-19 symptoms? I'm mad as hell. I'm not gonna take it anymore. Please tell me.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry to hear that. Whenever we do these type of trials, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Unfortunately, yeah. Well, the funny thing about that press conference was he said later on that he was only kidding. But if you watched him, he was dead serious when he
asked the question.
I mean, I
don't think Trump knows how to kid. I've never seen him kid about anything. Does he even understand the concept of humor?
No. Humor, no.
Yeah, he's.
Well, he's a legend in his own mind about the comedy. But now, when I saw that clip on, I think he was giving a press conference, and he asked Burst. He looked at her like, "Hey, aren't I right?" And she kind of looked down and
I felt sorry for her.
I
totally yes, because frankly, she was not allowed to react like, "What the fuck are you doing?"
I mean, you know what? Okay, I'm gonna be honest with you. I tried Ajax, chlorine. I used some liquid detergent, soap detergent. None of it worked, for my dishes. And then I tried Tide. And what's really upsets me is now I don't have enough detergent to wash my clothes.
You're so stupid.
Donald
But
Trump.
the mistake you made, Joel, is he talked about injecting the Clorox, not drinking it, Joel. Injecting it, Joel.
Inject it next
I asked
time.
Dr. Tsou to give me the injection. You know what he said? It was against medical ethics. So
Oh, well, if Dr. Tsou says that, that's what it is. I'm sorry. Hey, you know what? We are a little bit past halfway, and I don't think we've touched voter suppression yet. And Karen told us, hey, guys, you guys better get to voter suppression. So Karen, please.
Oh, yeah. So we ask our experts, are we going to be fighting in the streets on election day? Here in Michigan, we have the Supreme Court has said you can open carry. So, head down to your nearest poll with your rifle. It is absolutely okay.
Well, they will be kidnapping various public officials if it's not. But to be fair, they'll be plotting it in Ohio, in Dublin, Ohio, which is where they plotted, but they wanted to carry it out in Michigan as a proud son of the Wolverine state, born in Detroit, well, actually Highland Park. Again, there is a real possibility that there's going to be violence. I mean, just speaking as someone that's seen, again, the demonstrations against the mask, there were 1,000 armed people. Granted, the women basically were carrying sidearms, but when you see 1,000 people at your state capitol trying to get in because somebody wants them to wear a mask, it's really stunning. And Bethel, Ohio, you might have heard about that. The local minister and a teacher called a rally, and it got out that fascist, anti-fascist forces, Antifa, had come to town in buses, and people showed up with guns, axe handles in small town Ohio and beat their neighbors.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay,
I have
in
to.
Michigan, they had a huge armed rally at the Capitol or whatever, but it had unintended consequences, because when they came down here and had this rally about how their civil rights and whatnot were being violated, there was no COVID in the UP. And after they came down and mingled with one another and screamed and hollered about masses without wearing masks, they took their friend COVID back up to the UP with them.
Now, Karen, remember, this is a national show, so a lot of people don't know what UP means. So kind of tell them.
Upper Peninsula, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
The capital is in Lansing, which is in Lower Peninsula. And then up in the UP, they didn't have a lot of, I don't think they had any COVID before they did that, because your neighbors, they're not, it's more of a rural area. So you don't have to practice, social distancing so much, because your neighbor likely lives 20 miles from you. But once they came down and, kind of mingled together and sang the "We won't have it, we're going to do whatever we want" song, they took back an unwanted visitor with them. And I don't think they've been able to get rid of it since.
Undersecretary of State Robert Wilson, you've been a leader in North Carolina fighting voter suppression. What is the likely scenario? What do you think could happen in terms of, Supreme Court rulings, the recent Alito ruling that said that basically state Supreme Court decisions don't matter, that after November the 3rd, if there are absentee ballots, they may not be counted because Judge Alito says so, despite years and years of case precedent where state Supreme Courts determine election law. Can you explain to us what you think could possibly happen in North Carolina in terms of, thousands and thousands of votes being suppressed, especially absentee ballots, and what do you think we ought to do in North Carolina across the nation to make sure that every ballot that's cast is counted?
Well, I think, here in North Carolina, I think we're gonna be headed to court. I really do believe that. I think there's gonna be a situation presented where right now we're still in the process now of when they get ballots, they receive mail-in ballots, and then they're discarding some, and then they put them over to the side for cure. And we got about 15,000 that we're dealing with now. But what they're doing is, in my opinion, is they're trying to set up a situation where they're going to be dealing with the absentee ballot and the mail-in ballots. And they're going to say, at the end of the day, when the election is over with, if it's a close election here in North Carolina, say if there is, say Biden wins by 4%, and the mail-in ballots count for 7%. And they're going to do, the other side will allege that there was some fraud and cheating that was going on in that process. And they're going to go into court and they're going to ask the judge to say, Your Honor, we'd like to see those ballots so that we can see the legitimacy of those ballots and see if they were legal ballots or not. And we would like to count them. All right. So they're going to, knowing that there are millions of ballots. The idea is not necessarily to make sure that they are legal ballots. The idea is to slow down the process. Now, let me explain to you how the process works in North Carolina. Right now, in North Carolina, the electors have already been chosen on both sides. And on November the 4th, let's say if the State Board of Election was to certify the election on November the 7th, all right, then they would be seated according to what percentage of the vote each one won. Say if Trump won 40% and Biden got 60%, then they would be seated accordingly on December the 14th, which is when they all come together in Raleigh to cast their electoral votes. All right. So now what they're going to do, in my opinion, is they're going to try to slow down the vote so that on December the 8th, and when they're going to go into court somewhere between, I'm thinking November the 10th, between November 10th and November the 20th. And they're going to ask the judge to see those ballots. They're going to ask to count those ballots. And they're going to ask the judge, Your Honor, we would ask that the State Board of Election not certify an election until we have finished our count. All right. And if a judge grants that, then they will not certify the election until they finish their count. Now, mind you, they're not interested in getting a total count. So they'll go on and they'll put up a facade and they'll act like they're counting in all these counties, all 100 counties. They're counting these absentee and mail-in ballots. And they'll go until probably December the 9th. And they're going back into court and say, Your Honor, we finished counting. We've seen a lot of fraud. So we've decided that these are going to be the numbers. All right. Your Honor, you can now have them certified. So if they certified on December the 9th, mind you, up until from November the 4th up until December the 7th, they did not certify that election. So the electors that had been chosen by the Democratic Party and the Republican Party could not be seated. The General Assembly gets to pick, the House and the Senate in North Carolina gets to pick their own electors, which would be from December the 8th through December the 11th. They have a 3-day window. And they can pick electors who they think will be sympathetic to their candidate. All right. They're not obligated to go on the percentage basis at that time. So if they are the ones that are appointing the electors come December the 14th, and they have appointed those 15 electors, they can go into the meeting on December the 14th and appoint all 15 of their electoral votes to their candidate. Mind you, he may not have won the state, but he will get all 15 of those. And they will say, well, we saw a lot of fraud and cheating going on, and we just decided that this was the best way to go. And there's nothing you'll be able to do about it.
Professor Fritrakis, I'm sure you know about Alice in Wonderland, where everything is opposite as it appears. Well, there's Trump Wonderland and there's the Supreme Court Wonderland. This harkens back to 2000, Bush v. Gore, where the Supreme Court of the United States went ahead and said, well, we're going to stop the recount because of the hanging chads. And it was Judge Roberts, remember, and Kavanaugh, the Brooks Brothers mob, that basically caught the attention of the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court decides the fate of the nation of over 300 million people. Bush gets elected. We go into Iraq, tens of thousands of people killed. here in America, hundreds of thousands in Iraq, then ISIS forms. Can you please tell us, can you explain two things? One, what fraud are they talking about? There is no proof of fraud. And number two, as a lawyer, why would Republicans have legal standing in the Supreme Court or any court if there's no evidence of fraud? And I know what the standard is. You don't have to have empirical evidence of fraud, but you have to have a suspicion of fraud. How would the Republicans get standing November the 3rd and after? Because there is no fraud. I don't understand. Enlighten us.
Well, what you're really talking about is voter irregularities, not necessarily fraud. What you really need to do is sow confusion, and the arguments are gonna make are probably gonna be similar to Bush v. Gore, right? They're gonna claim that these ballots are different and violate in some way equal protection, right? There's the good, nice, on-time ballots, and then there's these horribly tainted, probably overwhelmingly Democratic ballots that need to be quarantined, and you need to have an apartheid system to separate them out. At least they, in some way pollute the primarily white ballot gene pool. Although I think people of color are voting in record number, and the blue tsunami may be coming, and no matter what they do, how much they cheat. But the thing is to sow confusion. And what scares me is that's a continuum. You can challenge all these ballots, but if that's not going to work, the other thing you can do is, create disruption, just like the Brooks Brothers riots that you mentioned, Joel. Again, you can create a situation. They stopped the vote count by harassing public officials. Kavanaugh doesn't belong on the Supreme Court. He should still be serving a jail time for what happened in Florida in 2000. But all of this occurs under 3 U.S. Code, Section 2 and Section 5. Section 2, as Robert pointed out, establishes the day, right? The safe harbor day, which is 6 days before the Electoral colleges are to meet on the 14th. And 3 U.S. Code Section 5 says the state legislature may. It gives authorization that would have to come in the form of some sort of bill, that they can create their own slate any way they want. And that going back to Bush v. Gore, Justice Scalia wrote in Bush v. Gore in dictum, sort of in the footnotes, that there's nothing in the US Constitution that links the electors to the actual vote. There's nothing that says the person with the most votes, a plurality wins, or a majority wins, or you have to take a percentage. You don't have to do any of that. And early on in our republic, up to the year 1800s, they acted, the House of Representatives would meet in caucus. Each party, the Democratic Republicans, who were the anti-federalists, and the Federalists, who ended up being the Federalists, and they would pick the electors without any reference to a popular vote. But again, early on, only about 5% of the population was eligible to vote, because it was about the 3 Ps, right? That you had to have the right skin pigment, a personal property, and a penis. So it was only 3 to 5% of the population that could even vote back then. And that's when these electoral slates, which is an old racist institution that was designed to hide the impact of the southern slave states. It was part of that compromise.
I want to hit you up on something, because I think it's important, and you opened the door for it. I've always called our constitution that was filled with aberrations, right? In effect, it was never a democratic document. It was a document for a few to maintain power. And you just gave the most eloquent elaboration about why it is a document to hold on to power, not necessarily following the dictates of the population at all. Now, don't you think it is about time for us now to start poking those holes in this document. There, I perceive, or I believe, that the Democratic Party, not necessarily the Democratic Party, that I shouldn't say the Democratic Party. I perceive that this is the election where the popular vote will get the entire government, sans the Supreme Court. Don't you think it is time for us to make the structural changes within the Senate, the structural changes that would be necessary to make, to start making that document live up to the fantasy that we have of it right now?
Absolutely. And remember, the architect of the Constitution is James Madison. And James Madison said that he, quote, feared the tyranny of the majority.
Right.
Which means that he feared democracy. Hence, if you go back and analyze the Constitution, right, you've got 3 branches of government, you've got 4 major institutions. Only one of them was directly elected originally,
right.
the House of Representatives. And to this day, I mean, think about how they pick Supreme Court justices. Hi, electors, rich white guys, many of them disproportionately picking up votes from the southern slave states, will pick a president, not directly, and he'll appoint for life with the approval of the US Senate, which is picked by the state legislatures. That's like democracy 5 times removed. I mean, we can begin by doing simple things, right? We can begin by saying that it shall be the job of an election official to register eligible voters to vote. We can make it a mandate. There's no right to vote in the US Constitution. It's drawn from a variety of court cases. So the notion also, we allow private, for-profit, partisan corporations to secretly count our ballots with proprietary software. How in the hell do you know the election is legitimate? You don't. Might be, might not be. Who in the hell allows private vendors, many of them historically linked to the CIA, which rigged elections all around the world, to count our votes?
Bob,
absolutely ludicrous. I wrote this paper for the American Political Science Association. Are US elections legitimate? And I answered it truthfully. We don't know. Who writes the codes?
Bob, Professor Fritrakis, listen. Now we have a new crime called VWD, voting while Democrat, right? So if you vote Democrat, then your ballot can be considered fraudulent. But really, I agree with Greg Palast, the exceptional progressive journalist. He says voter suppression is absolutely about race. We know Stacey Abrams lost the governorship due to purging of Black people. Is not the voter purging and is not the not counting absentee ballots really come down to one thing, and that's 21st century Jim Crow voter suppression based on race, because the Supreme Court and the Republicans know that, especially where I live in the South in North Carolina, a lot of those ballots that need cure, a lot of those ballots are going to come in after Election Day, will be Black voters. So if you stop counting those ballots, then you can do what? You can suppress the Black vote. Is this not about race?
No, absolutely. It's an apartheid system, as was the entire drug war. I mean, Florida's not a swing state. If you allow everyone to vote in Florida, at one point, 7% of the entire Black male population couldn't vote in Florida. So Florida's a swing state. No, it's not. It's a state where racist public officials have systematically targeted people of color so they can't vote. And then you pretend it's a swing state. It's not. Look, Ohio is a swing state. Hell no. It's only a swing state because you purged the 9 urban centers, particularly Toledo, Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Columbus. I wrote a book at this. I have the numbers. When you purge 1.2 million people and you find out 51% of them are Black, the vast majority, when they should be 12%, That is simply systematic racism.
I was going to ask, because you and Joel has spoke so eloquently on this. So how do we stop these systems that have been in place to suppress the vote? How do we stop that from playing into this election and we have Emperor Trump return to the throne?
Well, people need to counter where there's problems. People need to go there, observe, bring the weapon you need, your cell phone, digital recording. And also people you need to pressure all public officials to say, we're going to respect the legitimate results. We're not going to believe Trump when he talks about this red mirage because there's more Republicans, say, voting on election day. We're going to wait till all the votes come in. We're going to count every vote, and we're going to abide by democratic principles. And we're going to get all public officials, we're going to pressure them over and over again. And then if somehow they steal the election, there's a spectrum. They try to steal it here by getting rid of ballots. Or the worst case, something gets burnt down or shredded, right? It's only Reichstag's burning, is that people should pledge, like the Pledge of Action that many of us took when we were messing around in Central America back in the 1980s, that we are willing to occupy, that we are willing to go into a general strike and close this society down, because rich people love their money and they're not going to tolerate Trump if their wealth is on the line. And the general strike has worked historically. It's the railroad strike of 1877. Sometimes there's casualties, people get hurt, people get arrested. But for the most part, every general strike in this country has brought about democratic reform.
Bob. I think this is important, what you just said right there. I think it's even a bit more important, and I think we need to start the preemption of that strike. In other words, I think it is time that we start saying, if we see shenanigans occurring with the vote, that we are starting to mobilize for that reality. Because I think what happens is, you gave a good example, some centers could get burnt down, ballots are burnt away, and then suddenly there's no evidence of anything happening, right? But if they know that, and again, you don't have to convince a lot of people. There's not a lot of people who run this country. It's a plutocracy that runs this country. If the plutocracy know that the left is sufficiently organized that there's going to be pain if they allow their sycophants to take over, then I think it'll be there. But look, Karen, we are down to only 4 minutes.
Can I add one caveat to this? I would simply say to you that I would also say that I think what we need to do is to make sure that in every state, in every race, nobody could declare themselves the winner of that race until the state has certified that they are in fact the winner of that race. And that should happen all across the nation.
I would like to add to that, Robert. Look, this is real simple. If we're going to preserve our democracy, we're going to have to participate in it.
Right.
John Lewis, who Karen and I got to know quite well in the years that we served with Mr. Connors, you talk about good trouble. We all know what good trouble is.
Good trouble.
I would urge everyone listening and watching A Deeper Look to do one thing. If the Supreme Court tries to hijack this election, the right-wing Supreme Court, and if the Republican Party tries to steal this election, then we must occupy the Supreme Court. We must occupy every court building in our cities and towns, say yes to democracy, no to fascism. You can all, I always wear a suit and a tie to a protest. I've only been arrested.
I ain't gonna do that.
And I got arrested in my suit and tie. We don't have to look like we're going to burn anything down. Just, look respectable, man. You got to be politically strategic here and boycott and strike and don't show up to public school, because please listen to me. Our nation has been taken over by a Trump dictatorship where the Attorney General's office is no longer independent. It's subservient to the whims of Donald Trump. That's called fascism. Wake the hell up, as Egberto might say. James Comey gets an interview with Donald Trump. I want your loyalty. No, Trump. The FBI doesn't swear loyalty to you. They're independent. So, if the election is stolen, it's our job as Americans, as patriots, to go to the streets and suites, lawyer up lawsuits, but take our democracy back. That's all I want to say.
Brother Joel Segal, as the lowly timekeeper here, I have to ask Karen to bring us home.
Okay, so let me just say, this was a very lively show. I want to thank our guest, and I want to say to the audience, watch the election. I think that it's very important that we all be prepared to get into some good trouble, because that may be the only way the emperor does not return to the throne. I want to thank you so much for spending an hour with us today, and I hope you will join us again on the next time we do a deeper look.